وما أرسلنا من قبلك إلا رجالا نوحي إليهم فاسألوا أهل الذكر إن كنتم لا تعلمون.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man walaha ma ba'd. So, we are well aware that one of the biggest issues of consternation, of controversy between the American Muslim community, frankly the Western Muslim community, is the issue of purchasing a house and the mechanisms for doing so, whether one is allowed to avail oneself to the conventional mortgages, or whether it is permissible to go to the Islamic bankings, or is it even Islamic, these particular banking systems that are out there, the various enterprises that are giving these Islamic mortgages, are they truly Islamic and halal or not? And I've been bombarded, as all of the students of knowledge and scholars have been for so long, and I've been delaying giving a full and detailed response. And today, inshallah ta'ala, we will begin with a very deep and intensive dialogue. And I have with me, joining me today, somebody whom I consider to be not just a friend but a mentor, and that is Dr. Hatem Al-Hajj. Dr. Hatem Al-Hajj, before I ask him to speak, I have to introduce him, and I'm sorry to be a little bit praising here, so maybe Dr. Hatem, you can put some earplugs on, inshallah ta'ala. But I consider Dr. Hatem Al-Hajj to be one of the marji's, one of the sources of Islamic law and fatwa in this country. And on a personal note, when I myself am wondering about something, I want to bounce ideas off of somebody, when I don't really know myself which direction to go about a fiqh issue or something, then the first person that I text is actually Dr. Hatem Al-Hajj. And of course, Dr. Hatem Al-Hajj isn't just a Shaykh or an alim, he's also board certified in pediatrics by the American Board of Pediatrics, so he's a practicing doctor as well. He has a PhD in comparative fiqh from Lebanon, from Al-Jinan University, and he's also done an MA in Shariah from the American Open University, and he's a professor, assistant professor in this department of the College of Islamic Studies at Mishka University. And of course, he's also one of the pillars of AMJA, the American Muslim Jurists Association. And so I welcome Dr. Hatem Al-Hajj. Assalamu alaikum, Shaykhana.
Alaikum alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah, alhamdulillah, sallallahu alaihi wa sallam. As for the introduction, I don't deserve it, and it is, out of your humbleness, jazakallah khairan, but, I just wanted to say that I don't deserve it. Inshallah, we will have a fruitful discussion today. This is a very complicated issue, and I will not hide also my reluctance to talk about this subject, because it's, and I know of so many scholars throughout the Muslim world that are extremely reluctant to talk about this subject, because as you are well aware, it's very complicated. The distance between the reality and what we aspire to seems to be large, and we're trying as much as we can. We're trying not to be cynical, but we're trying also not to be naive, and that balance is very hard to strike. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guide our tongues and our hearts.
So Shaykhana, one of the reasons, I'll be honest, that I've been very hesitant to speak about this issue, and anybody who's asked me, for the last few years, I keep on saying, inshallah, I'll release something soon, is that I feel that this is a very sensitive topic, and anybody who gives a fatwa is going to have to bear the responsibility of that fatwa. And it is something that I've been very cautious about. As you yourself were saying, this is a very, very big issue. It's not a trivial matter. And one is just cognizant of the difficulties, as you said, balancing between the needs of the Muslim community and between the great sin of interest. And it's not a very easy and delicate balance. So I completely share with you the sentiment of the seriousness of this matter, and I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to guide all of us to that which is pleasing, and to forgive any mistake that we might make. So Shaykhana, before we jump into the issue of mortgages and whatnot, do you have any overall comment about the modern field of Islamic finance? I know it is one of your specialities, so overall, do you have anything you'd like to say about the new field of Islamic finance?
Alhamdulillah. Well, the name itself, Islamic finance, I guess if we're talking about providing funds for business ventures, then yes, Islamic finance would not be oxymoronic in this case, because we have the mudaraba, which is profit sharing. We have different kinds of partnership, like Ainan, like full reign partnership, and other types of partnership that were meant to provide funds for business ventures. But when it comes to providing funds for a purchase of an item for use or consumption, like a house, a car, etc., then the name itself, the tension within the name is quite obvious, because providing funds for someone to purchase an item, an object for use or consumption in Islam is a benevolent act. It's called the qard hasan. It's a goodly loan, and no profit is expected to be made out of this. But nowadays, it is not possible, basically, to fulfill the needs of all the people because of how the world has become, because the expectations and the needs. And I don't want to be harsh on the people also and make it all about expectations or extravagance. There are needs that need to be fulfilled, and we live within a financial system, a global financial system that is insensitive to and inconsiderate of our values, not because they have to, not because there is conspiracy, or not because they're just like evil and they want basically to oppose our values, but because they just don't share our values, we don't have the size of Islamic finance. In 2010, it was worth about $1.3 trillion. That may sound like a big number, but it is actually not that big. I heard that this is half of what a conventional bank, one of the largest conventional banks would be worth, just one bank. So the idea here is Islamic finance is trying basically to instrumentalize some of the old contracts that we had in a completely new environment, and within a global financial system that is not particularly accommodating of our laws or our values. So that's the difficulty, and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make it easy for the people who embark on this task, embark on the task of adapting these contracts to modern finance.
I mean, so Shaykhna, for our viewers, again, just a very brief basic point of fiqh is that in our Sharia, giving somebody a loan is never meant to generate profit. In fact, in the authentic hadith in the Sunan, our Prophet ﷺ said that whoever gives somebody a qard hasana, a loan, shall get half of that money as a reward of giving sadaqah. So if you gave 10,000 loan and you got 10,000 back, Allah will reward you 5,000 as if you gave sadaqah to somebody. So this is the purpose, is that in Islamic Sharia, in fiqh, giving somebody qard hasana, that's why it's called qard hasana, a good loan. It's a loan from the heart. You give somebody something that is a genuine good deed. You expect Allah to reward you. Obviously, the modern notion of capitalism, of the entire globe of finance, it is not based on this principle. And so Islamic finance specifically, and really Islamic economics, modern Islamic economics, it's actually a fascinating field. As the Shaykh said, we really should feel sympathetic for the people involved. They're trying to make the best of a very, very different paradigm. The Sharia and its paradigm is so different than the modern notions of the bank and of giving usurious loans. And of course, Muslims, all of us, are connected to the modern world. We cannot live in an isolated bubble, so we have to make the best of a very difficult situation. So with that, Shaykhana, why don't I ask you, setting up the entire stage here, is that can you explain to us the Islamic notion of riba, And very briefly, is the Western notion of interest the same or different than the Islamic notion of riba?
Okay, alhamdulillah. Well, بينهما خصوص وعموم. So interest is more general than riba in a sense, and riba is more general than interest in a sense. So riba linguistically means increase. And in Islam, there are like 3 different types of riba. So we have riba nasi'a, which is deferment, and we have riba al-yad, which is exchange, the riba of exchange, and I may, clarify what this means. And then we have riba al-fadl, which is the riba of increase. Or you may say that we have like riba al-qurud, which is the riba of loans, and riba al-buyu', which is the riba of sales. Riba al-qurud is basically when you give a loan and you expect a return on this loan, like a profit, to be made when you are paid back. That is basically riba al-qurud. It is the increase of the increase that is a result of the deferment of the payment. And in riba al-buyu', it's completely different. And that's why the concept of riba is much larger than simply interest, because interest will accrue on the loan due to the deferment. That is riba al-nasi'a, or riba of deferment. But then we have the concept of riba al-buyu', which is riba in sales. And riba in sales results from exchanging 2 items that are usurious items. They were mentioned in one hadith, the hadith of Ubadah ibn as-Samit, where the Prophet ﷺ mentioned gold, silver, wheat, barley, dates, and salt. He mentioned 6 items, and he said, and the hadith is long, but the Prophet ﷺ said, الذهب بالذهب والفضة بالفضة والبر بالبر والشعير بالشعير والتمر بالتمر والملح بالملح مثلا بمثل سواء بسواء فإن اختلفت هذه الأصناف فبيعوا كيفما شئتم إن كان يدا بيد فمن زاد أو ازداد فقد أربى. So the Prophet ﷺ said that these items, when gold is paid for by gold, silver for silver, wheat for wheat, barley for barley, dates for dates, and salt for salt, has to be like for like, equal for equal, and if and if they are of different kinds, then you could sell as much as you want, like with an increase in the amount, as long as it is hand to hand or immediate exchange. And then whoever offers an increase or asks for an increase has committed riba. Now, so we have 2 different types here of riba that are basically implied in this hadith. One of them is riba al-fadl, which is increase. So when you trade, for instance, wheat for wheat, it has to be like for like, equal for equal, hand to hand. When you treat wheat for barley, it does not have to be equal for equal, but it has to be hand to hand, immediate exchange. When you trade gold for silver or silver for gold, they don't have to be equal for equal, but they have to be hand to hand. And then gold and wheat, they don't have to be either. So there could be deferment, there could be increase, because they belong to 2 different groups. So riba, in that sense, is a very complicated matter. It is not only interest that accrues on a loan because of the deferment, which is the common form of riba that comes to mind when riba is mentioned, but there is a whole genre of riba al-buyu' or riba of sales that is divided into 2 types, fadl, which is increase, and exchange, which is yad, the riba al-yad. So riba is much more general than interest. But in a sense, when people talk about interest, when people translate riba to usury, usury also is a problematic translation because usury is exorbitant interest. Riba is not only exorbitant interest. Riba is any interest, but any interest that accrues on a loan. Any interest that accrues on a loan. But if I sell you, if you ask me for my laptop, and I sell you my laptop for, like, let's say $500, and you say I don't have the money, can we defer the payment until next month? And then I tell you, okay, if you will pay me next month, or if you will pay me installments over 3 or 4 or 6 months, then it is not $500. I will sell you the laptop for $700 to be paid over 6 months. Is that interest? Well, some people could say that I added interest. But now this is a commodity for price, and I am not, basically, this is not a loan. This is a sale. So can I add the time value to the price in a sale? Yes. Can I calculate, if I calculate this on the basis of some formula in my mind, let us say 7%, at a rate of 7%, and I even tell you how I calculated it. That is called interest, but that is not haram. That is not riba. I am selling you my laptop, and I am adding the time value, not in a loan transaction, but in a sale transaction. As long as we agree on one final version of the contract. Certainly, we cannot keep it open-ended, where I tell you the price is 500 now with a 7% interest. So if you pay over 1 year, it is this, or 2 years, it's that. Like, if we finalize the contract and we have one form of contract now, the laptop will be for 700 over 6 months, regardless of how I arrived at this number, and regardless of whether I will tell you how I arrived or not. This is a permissible transaction, and it is not usurious.
So to continue it for Shaykhna, basically what can be said here is that riba, the Islamic term, is broader, generally speaking, than the Western notion of interest because of a debt. And in our Sharia, there is a hadith in Daraqutni. It is a weak hadith, but the concept is there. It is reported that the Prophet said, but it is a weak hadith, is most likely similar of a companion, that كُلُّ قَرْضٍ جَرَّ مَنْفَعَةً فَهُوَ riba. Every single loan that generates any type of benefit, it is considered to be riba. So when you stipulate in a loan that you're going to get a benefit from that loan, the majority of our scholars would consider that to be a type of riba. Therefore, the interest that we people in this part of the world charge when they give a loan, that is definitely a type of riba by the explicit text of the hadith. And before I move on as well, I'd like to point out that there is no question that riba is one of the major sins in our religion. Allah Azza wa Jal explicitly mentions in the Quran that whoever takes riba, it is as if he is declaring war against Allah and His Messenger. That having been said, we need to be a little bit careful and accurate. There is a genre of hadith that seems to equate riba with a'udhu billah, yani doing zina with one's maharim or with one's sister or mother, a'udhu billah. And these ahadith, it is true that some of our later scholars consider them to be hasan, but the reality is that the majority of our scholars, including the ones that are really more reputable in this field, Ibn al-Qayyim, Ibn al-Jawzi in his Mawdu'at, Ibn Abi Hatem, they all said that any of these narrations that seem to link the sins of riba with doing zina with one of your mahrams, all of this is from basically the storytellers. It's not from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We don't need that genre of hadith. We have enough to tell us that riba is a very, very major sin. The next question, Shaykhana, is that if you look at the text of the Quran, Allah Azza wa Jal always criticizes يَأْكُلُونَ الرِّبَى, those that are eating riba. And in some of the madhabs, as you're aware, there is this distinction made between the sin of charging interest versus the sin of paying interest. And so some madhabs and some scholars, they differentiate and they say that the sin of charging is more than the sin of being forced to pay. As well in the hadith in Sahih Muslim and others that our Prophet ﷺ said that the one who gives it and the one who takes it and the one who witnesses and the one who writes the contract, they're all the same. So how do we understand this, Shaykhana? Is the sin of charging interest always the same as the sin of being forced to pay it?
I also concur with you on the genre of a hadith that talk about that actually not only equate riba to zina, but make riba worse than 36 acts of zina, or making zina with one's mother. A'udhu billah. I used to actually I used to sort of accept one version of these hadiths because of the authentication of Shaykh al-Albani, but then I had a lot of difficulty justifying the hadith, the meaning of the hadith to myself, and I just was forcing myself to accept it, and I was trying to figure out using sort of like all my sort of mental capacity to justify it somehow. But then, as you said, most of the scholars, most of the erudite hadith scholars have consider the whole genre of hadith in this regard weak, not traceable to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Then you have the hadith of Jabir in Sahih Muslim that you mentioned, where the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, لعن الله أكل الربا وموكله وشاهديه وكاتبه وقالهم سواء. May Allah curse the one who devours riba or consume, and the one who feeds them, the one who takes it, gives it, and the one who takes it, and the two scribes, or the two witnesses and the scribe. And he said that they are equal. I believe that, I believe in the position of the scholars who said that they are equal in being partners in crime, in a sense, so that had they not all done this, like had they not helped each other doing this, the crime needed all of those sort of members. But that is why they are equal, because their participation in this crime was needed for the crime to be committed. Some of the scholars also said they are equal in the sense that they are equal in أصل الاسم لا مقدار الاسم. So they are equal in being sinful, not in the magnitude of the sin. So in other words, they're all sinful. That's what the Prophet ﷺ meant to say, not equally sinful in the sense of the magnitude of the sin itself. Some would say that sometimes the Prophet ﷺ would talk about the reward of, if you believe that this is also an authentic tradition, the reward of staying in the masjid after Salat al-Subh, for instance, until the sun rises, and then you pray 2 rak'ahs. So you have the reward of a Hajj and Umrah, tamma, complete Hajj and Umrah. So it is a little bit difficult, because Hajj and Umrah, there is so much that you do, and we know the reward of Hajj and Umrah, and so some people may say that it is to encourage people, and some people may say that no, we will take it, as the Prophet ﷺ said, but in Hajj and Umrah, there is so much more you do than the basic reward of Hajj and Umrah, so ultimately it is not going to be the same. And certainly the exploiter and the exploited, if the exploitation of people is one of the major illas or the major causes of the prohibition of riba, or wisdoms of the prohibition of riba, you cannot hold equal the exploiter and the exploited. There's got to be a difference in sin.
Precisely. Jazakumullah khair, Shaykh. And I remember when you were speaking, it reminded me something that I heard from our Shaykh ibn Uthaymeen, Allah yarhamu. He said to us in one of his lessons, he complained of and this is back in the 90s, he complained of the rising trend of zahirism, of a literalism, that you just take a hadith and you don't really understand the fiqh behind it. And he decried this new trend that was arising in that time frame. And as you pointed out, Shaykhana, this hadith, generally speaking, pretty much the majority of the shurrah and the fuqaha, they have understood it in a manner, as you correctly pointed out, that there is no way that the one who charges interest, dhulman wa udwanan, wanting to increase his wealth, there is no way that the sin of that person is going to be the same technically as the sin of the one who is in a very difficult situation, in dire circumstances, or even in a haraj, not necessarily a darura, as we're going to come to, and he's kind of forced because of the lifestyle or the pressures of the world that he's living in to give an amount of interest. They cannot be the same based upon many other principles of the Sharia. So we don't just find one hadith and then use it to trump all the verses and all of the other hadith. Rather, we form a narrative that takes everything into account. And the fact that, for example, the Quran always criticizes those who eat riba, and also that we have other hadith, la darar wa la dirar, and other notions of this nature. So it is definitely safe to say that a person who might be forced to give riba because of certain circumstances, may Allah protect and forgive all of us, that there's no way that sin would be, if it is even a sin, would be anywhere near the sin of the one who is willingly, for no reason other than greed, charging riba on a loan that he gives somebody. So Shaykhana, the next question that I have for you is that, as you're aware, there are some voices in our times that claim that the conventional mortgage, the standard mortgage that is people avail themselves to in America, that it does not constitute a type of Islamic riba. And they have their reasons for saying so, that the bank owns it, it doesn't give an actual, that it's not an actual riba loan. And they have their reasons for saying so. What is your position? Is a mortgage an example of Islamic riba?
The mortgage is certainly an example of Islamic riba. What happens in a conventional mortgage is that the bank gives you the money to purchase the house and gets back more over time. That's exactly, that's riba. There is no merchandise here at all that the bank acquires and sells to you. It is basically exchanging money for money with deferment in exchange for an increase or a profit on the return on the investment. So that's riba from the Islamic perspective. And I am aware of the scholars who are trying to say that basically, because you have, it is not one group of scholars saying the same thing. You have different groups, and some of them are saying that to deposit money in the bank is not riba because the banking system is so advanced and they have their own calculations and they invest this money, and because they are capable of forecasting the profit that they will make, they can tell you exactly how much profit you'll be making, and so on and so forth. But there is another group of scholars who are actually trying to go back all the way and deconstruct the notion of riba in modern times, particularly after Nixon unlinked the currency, the American currency, which is the master currency in the world, from the gold reserve, and abandoned the gold standard, which started from the time of Roosevelt, but was completed by Nixon. It started during the Great Depression. And now the currency is unlinked to the gold reserve. And so some of the scholars are saying, what proof do you have that basically the dollars and sterling pounds and euros are usurious items? Are you likening them to gold and silver? Why are you likening them to gold and silver? And then we start getting to technicalities. And there are three different, even when it comes to Islamic financing, even when it comes when you're trying to provide an Islamic product, there is a genuine solutions, genuine alternatives that are philosophically different and ideologically different from the conventional products. And there are technical differences. You're trying to provide a product that is technically different but functionally the same, or you're basically not even trying to provide a product that's technically different, but you are trying to rhetorically basically convince the masses that your product is actually Sharia compliant without it even being technically different from the products that we have in the market or the conventional products. The same we can say about the scholars that are trying to basically say that there is no riba anymore, unless it is gold for gold. But there is basically no riba anymore. And in this case, you could say, well, the illah of riba, or the cause behind the prohibition of exchanging gold for gold and gold for silver and so on and so forth, is that they are measured by weight, and that would be the Hanafi and Hanbali position. But according to the Malikis and Shafi'is, the reason behind the prohibition of riba in gold and silver is that they are currencies, asman. If here, the problem here is that if you actually say, well, I'm Hanafi or Hanbali, and I believe that the reason behind the prohibition is weight, then we will be circumventing the objectives of Sharia with technicalities. And the technicality here is not simply sly maneuvering or deceptive legal devices. You're actually talking about 2 mazahib out of 4, but it's still a technicality, because if you look at it functionally, philosophically, then we will not have riba anymore. And then we will create problems for zakat as well.
Exactly.
It's limited to riba. If you're not, you're going to be saying that dollars and pounds and euros and reals and so on cannot be likened to gold and silver, then you're not going to only, we're not going to only have problems in the chapters of riba, but we will also be having a lot of problems in zakat as well.
Precisely. So, Shaykhana, we are in full agreement then that those small minority of voices, with utmost respect to them, who claim that mortgages are simply not even an example of riba, that they really don't seem to be coming from a solid background. And we both agree that the conventional mortgage is in fact a type of riba. Now, let's now get to the juicy stuff here. We agree that the mortgage loan is a type of riba loan. The question arises, under what circumstances would this be permissible? We are all aware, Shaykhana, that for the last 30 years or more, there has been an ongoing debate amongst our scholarly class, one side of which allows a conventional mortgage with a list of reasonable conditions. It must be the house that you live in. You cannot afford, the alternatives, meaning you cannot just purchase the house by cash. You don't do this for business. And of course, you have some very, very well-respected jurists. The Shaykh Qardawi is, of course, the most famous example. But it's not just him. I mean, the European Council for Fatwa and Research in 1999, by a large majority, if not unanimous, I forgot, they voted. They also gave a fatwa in this regard. The number of scholars that say that a conventional mortgage, just straight up from the bank, if you're living in the West and you're middle class, basically you're not a millionaire, you can't just afford it by one check or whatnot, that they say that it is a type of need, not a type of darura or necessity, but a type of need. And they have their illas without getting into the reasons and the causes, because again, that's a bit too advanced for our a conversation here. But just without getting into all of the details of why they're saying this, what is your frank assessment, your own personal opinion, that is it permissible for the Muslim living in the West to obtain a conventional mortgage? And also, what is your advice to the lay Muslim when he sees, Shaykh Qardawi and these great ulama on one side, and then on the other side also great ulama? So part A and part B, if you want to, tafaddal Shaykh. Tafaddal Shaykh.
Well, part A is easy, because I would have to say 2 things. I'm a member of AMJA, and at AMJA, we, our position on this issue is clear, that conventional mortgage is not permissible except in the case of darura and not haja, except in the case of darura and not haja. And so, you know, the esteemed scholars of the European Council, they felt that there is a haja, and they felt that there is like a haja amma, and they basically allowed conventional mortgage, but they allowed it if there is no Islamic alternative. And since we have somewhat, you know, an Islamic alternative now, then we all are in agreement that you should first seek the Islamic alternative that is available for people in the US and in Europe as well. So that at the time they allowed this, there was no Islamic alternative. And they, I do remember that they clearly stated that as long as there is no Islamic alternative, then it would be allowable for people to obtain a conventional mortgage. I would say that let us basically say that this should be addressed on one-by-one basis. The person who does not have access to an Islamic mortgage and feels that he has some type of darura or haja, he needs to ask a scholar about this and then go by their fatwa. As for part B, you know that it's a complicated question. I would just say that the two important pieces of advice here are: one, Imam Shafi'i said, أجمع المسلمون أنه من استبانت له سنة رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم لم يكن يقول أحد من الناس. The Muslims unanimously agreed that to whomever the Sunnah has become clear, it is not permissible for them to leave it for the statement of any scholar. Now, can all Muslims, in certain cases, things could be clear. In many cases, you may not be able to discern. You may not be able to understand the rationale behind the fatwas of the scholars, but when it is clear to you that the intent of Allah and His Messenger is to prohibit or to allow something, then the statement of a scholar will not save you. If you feel in your heart that you're quite confident that this is what Allah and His Messenger had wanted of you. The second thing is the hadith of Wabisa ibn Ma'bad, which is Safti qalbak, البر ما اطمأنت إليه النفس واطمأن إليه القلب والإثم ما حاك في النفس وتردد في الصدر وإن أفتاك الناس وأفتوك. So consult your heart. When the Prophet ﷺ said to Wabisa, consult your heart. Righteousness is that with which you feel comfortable, or the heart feels tranquil and the soul feels comfortable. And ism, or sin, is what wavers in your chest and causes discomfort in your breast, regardless of how many fatwas or regardless of how many times the people have given you their legal counsel or their fatwa. So having said this, if your heart feels uncomfortable, then I would tell you, listen to your heart. And I would say in general, one should try as much as they can to exercise wara, cautiousness, scrupulosity, religious scrupulosity, or being cautious, being careful. But when there is a particular issue that causes you hardship, there is a particular matter, particular issue that causes you hardship, and you've got two different opinions from two different scholars, one is easier and one is more difficult, and it is not clear to you what Allah wanted of you in this particular respect, and you just can't understand the rationale behind the two fatwas, it is okay to take the easier one. It is not saying that you're going to be doing this all the time. You're going to be scanning all the fiqh, in the world and picking out all the easier fatwa. But I'm saying that if you come across or encounter a matter that is causing you hardship and different fatwa, you hear different fatwa, and some are easier and some are harder, it is okay in this case to take the easier fatwa.
Jayyid. So, Shaykhana, to summarize then, that the position of Shaykh Qaradawi and the European Council, we respect it, and it is coming from a legitimate paradigm. We are not dismissing it at all. It is a legitimate fatwa. However, I think that both of us are in a very similar wavelength that we don't endorse that fatwa unconditionally. Rather, only if there is no alternative and if the person's circumstances are specifically in a pretty difficult situation, perhaps in that particular exceptional scenario. But as a default, as a norm, the both of us are very hesitant to open this door. Shaykh, I want to add here though, one of my dear mentors as well, and I mentioned his name because his YouTube clip went viral. Tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of people saw it. A few months ago, he released a short video about mortgages. Dr. Akram Nadwi, I'm sure you're aware of him, and a great alim and sheikh. And he said that when it comes to food and drink, the haram will never become halal unless it is darura, life and death. However, he said, when it comes to finances and financial matters, he says, generally speaking, the haram becomes halal not at the level of darura, but at the level of haja, or a general need. Now, for our viewers, in Islamic law, matters are divided into daruriyat and hajat and tahsiniyat. And so, darura is like you need it, or else you're going to die. Food, water, drink, air. Haja, it's something that makes life, livable. If you don't have it, you're not going to die, but it just makes life very difficult. And then tahsiniyat is, of course, something that makes life luxurious and nice, but you don't even need it. And his point was that, for example, insurance, for example, car insurance, it's not darura, but it is a haja. You could get by. You're not going to die if you don't have car insurance, but it's a haja. And he gave other examples from the economic field as well. And then he said that most of our scholars understand this when it comes to most of the buyu' transactions, that there's a haja, and so they'll overlook. Yet when it comes to mortgages, he says that the haja might even be even more so. For example, you want to have a house in the district that your children go to school to, and it's a good school. Or you want to get a house that is close to the masjid, or you want to get a house that is close to your parents, for example. That is a bigger haja than many of the other transactional hajat that many of our scholars allow, they allow certain concessions for. So he was very clear in this regard, and he of course endorsed the European Council of Fatwa that the default ruling for them would be that the average Muslim in the West would be allowed to take a mortgage because he said it is a haja, and because of hajat you're allowed some laxity when it comes to financial issues. Your comments and thoughts about this, Shaykhana?
It is very complicated, and certainly I respect Shaykh Akram Nadwi a great deal. He's a great scholar. I just wanted to say that they're not all equal. They're not created equal. Different sins are different. When it comes to insurance, insurance is basically prohibited because of al-gharar. And al-gharar, which is speculation and risk-taking due to uncertainty and ambiguity, is a genre of sins or sort of mukhalafat, mahzurat, prohibited transactions. The whole genre of these prohibited transactions, there are many exceptions in the Sharia where gharar has been allowed by the Sharia. Some degree of gharar has been allowed by the Sharia. Some degree of gharar has been allowed by the Sharia for needs, for various needs. But when it comes to riba in particular, riba and gharar are not the same. So that is why, generally speaking, if we're talking about the gharar, or we're talking about sort of clauses in the contract that are not compliant, then certainly haja and darura, they will both be operative here in making concessions. But when it comes to the clear-cut riba, when it comes to riba nasi'a, the agreed upon riba, the clear-cut riba, then this is where we say that it is only the darura and not the haja that will allow concessions. Having said that, I understand that there is that someone can argue about this. Someone can also say that riba is not prohibited in and of itself. It is prohibited because of what it leads to. as a to evil. Not that it is evil in and of itself, but it is a means to evil. And why are you creating that difference between riba and the gharar? Someone can also say that the Prophet ﷺ allowed some degree of riba in al-araya, which is basically to exchange dried dates for ripe dates on the palm trees. And certainly there are different kinds of riba combined in this transaction, but he allowed it for a haja, not darura. The haja here, people wanted to eat fresh dates. I mean, they have the dried dates. It's not like they go and buy, but they wanted to eat fresh dates. So he recognized their need for fresh dates, and he allowed this. So I understand that there is like it is not completely cut and dry, but what we're trying to say is that there has been like close to a consensus of the contemporary Muslim scholars that riba is a category that is higher in prohibition. I mean, it's quite obvious, riba, the prohibition of riba, all of the ayat and the hadith about riba are quite obvious. So they are saying that this is a category that is different from gharar or undue risk-taking. That's why they have been a lot more permissive in things like insurance than they were in clear-cut riba. So Allah knows best.
Excellent. So once again, Jazakallah khair, Shaykhana. So once again, the fatwa of our dear Shaykh as well, definitely coming from a very solid paradigm, definitely great usul, and you can make an argument, but as is clear, you respectfully disagree because of a very technical point, which is actually not that technical. It is that the gravity of the sin of riba is a totally different caliber, if you like, than the other issues that the Sharia might have overlooked when it comes to other financial matters. So because of this, you are not comfortable opening the door, and that's a very valid paradigm. طيب شيخنا, now
Shaykh Yasser, I wanted also, Shaykh Yasser, if you don't mind, I just wanted to say that many of the scholars are saying this because of a different concept. Like there is another layer of complexity here, which is al-haj al-amma, the public need, and that is why some scholars are being more permissive. And Imam al-Juwayni in book al-Ghiyasi or Ghiyas al-Umam, he talks about this, and he talks about, let us say, إذا فسدت المكاسب كلها, that means the livelihood become so difficult, halal means livelihood becomes so rare and scarce and difficult, وطبق طبق الأرض الحرام, that haram prevails on earth. And then he said something that is very interesting. He said that, it is not far-fetched to say that this is the case in our times. In his 5th century, then it is not possible for us, حمل الناس على الانكفاف عن الأقوات والتعري عن البز. It is not possible for us to demand of people to basically refrain from sustenance or to abstain from sustaining themselves and clothing themselves and so on and so forth. And then he continued, and this is like he continued to talk about different examples where it will not be only for darura but for haja, where the concessions will be made not only for darurat but for hajat. And he mentions that if the Muslims limit themselves during those times, if the Muslims limit themselves to darurat, that will debilitate the ummah as an ummah. So that is also another reason why I do not condemn the other fatwa. I just disagree without condemnation, because I do understand that there are different takes on this matter, and I respect all the scholars and their takes, as long as they use proper usul and proper methodology.
Jazakumullah khair, Shaykhna. And again, I'd like to underscore this point. What Dr. Hatem said, especially for our viewers, is that all too often we find some of our students, may Allah Azza wa Jal, guide them and grant them more wisdom. They are so overzealous in their remarks about great ulama, that they disagree with, and they don't understand that in fact those ulama, their usul are solid. They wouldn't be ulama, I mean, if they had usul that are completely whacked out or far left field. They're coming from a solid paradigm. And actually, you know, if you listen to Dr. Hatem carefully, subhanAllah, what a generous spirit of Dr. Hatem. He actually gave more arguments even though he doesn't agree with it, right? And he's saying, I see where they're coming from. So this is the spirit that I wish all of us have, is that utmost respect. I respectfully disagree with their fatwa. They have the paradigm correct, they have the usul valid, but it is a gray area, and they are prioritizing certain things, we are prioritizing other things. So alhamdulillah, Dr. Hatem, we're exactly on the same wavelength here. We have 3 questions left, but these are the zubda and the khulasa now. So now, we've spoken about general mortgages. Let us get to the issue of the Islamic mortgages. That is the conventional name that is given to them. And before I ask you the question, let me set it up for our audience and viewers. A brief summary is warranted here, that the Islamic companies that offer Sharia compliant loans, basically, I'm calling it an Islamic mortgage because that's some of the terms that is used, but it's called a Sharia compliant loan. There are a number of models that these companies use. 3 of them are the most famous. They're not the only, but these are the most utilized. The first of them is called the murabaha, with a promise to pay. And what that is that the company buys the house and then sells you the house back in installments for a profit. Okay, so this is the murabaha ma'al wa'du bishra, with a promise to pay. This is the first model that is used. The second model, which is perhaps the most common in North America, and that is al-musharaka al-mutanaqisa al-muntahi bit-tamlik. That's a diminishing partnership that eventually ends with you owning the property. And in the second model, the Islamic company purchases the house along with you. You are both owning the house, and you enter into a partnership, and the percentage of ownership slowly diminishes as you keep on paying the monthly installment, and you pay the same amount, but a portion of that goes back to the loan and a portion of that goes to the rent. And the proportion of loan versus rent, it continues to change as the years go on, until finally you have paid off the entire loan and the rent, and then the house is yours. So this is called the diminishing partnership model, al-musharaka al-mutanaqisa. And then the third model, which is used by 1 or 2 companies here in North America, and that is the ijara, rent to own. And that is when the Islamic company, the Sharia compliant quote unquote company, that it'll ask you to get a conventional loan, and then it'll purchase the house off of the bank and then resell it to you in installments along with a rental agreement. So these are the 3 main conceptual mechanisms. Number 1, murabaha, with the promise to buy. Number 2 is the diminishing partnership. And number 3, the ijara, rent to own. For now, the question I want to ask you, Dr. Hatem, let's leave aside the real contracts that exist with these companies. Let's talk conceptually speaking. If we could have an ideal contract that is murabaha, with promise to buy, number 1, number 2, the diminishing partnership, and number 3, ijara, rent to own. What is your personal verdict, conceptually speaking, for an ideal contract in all of these 3 categories? Bismillah.
Bismillah. Well, the ideal contract would be the murabaha, because it will be easy. You know, the problem with the murabaha, the ideal contract is the murabaha if the Islamic mortgage company has all the resources it needs, or all the funds it needs for all the Muslims and all the people, their customers, without needing to go to the secondary market and sell those contracts. You know, the problem with murabaha is, murabaha means cost plus sale. It is when you, when it is called murabaha lil-amr bil-shira, as you said, it is basically cost plus sale to the purchase order. I go and order you to purchase a property for me, and you add your markup and sell it back to me after you possess it. You add your markup and sell it back to me for a larger sum of money over many years. So it's a simple contract. Simple contract that once we have ensured that you actually bought and possessed the property, you could turn around and sell it to me for a markup that you decide. Then what I will owe you is a debt. Now, you give me $300,000, and you give, like many other people, the 500,000, 800,000, and so on and so forth. You ran out of money. Unless you can take this contract and sell it in the secondary market to Freddie Mac, Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac or somebody, you will not have funds to give to any more clients. Then, if you're Muslim, you have a problem at your hand here, because you can't sell debts. The sale of debts is impermissible in Islam. So murabaha is not doable if we're talking about Muslim companies, and we do want to patronize Muslim companies, and we don't want to support them, and so on. Because of this reason, unless they have enough funds for everybody, which I don't know if anyone has. So that is murabaha. The diminishing partnership, the problem with diminishing partnership is that it is complicated, because you will continue to be a partner for 30 years. Mm-hmm. And you have to live up to what that means. You are a partner. So you have to live up to the requirements of partnership and the rules of partnership in Islamic law. And that makes it complicated. To get out of all of this, you will need to have many clauses in your contract that will be not compliant, or at least that you will have to put a lot of effort and so much patchwork to get them to comply. It will be pretty difficult to
Very
get
messy.
all the clauses to comply. The same applies to the rental one. You will be the lessor, and I will be the lessee. But as the financier, you are the lessor. And you are the lessor for how long? For 30 years. So you have to live up to the rules of ijara in Islamic law. And that is also difficult, because you will have to be responsible for periodical, or they call it al-siyana al-asasiyya. Like, the same applies to the diminishing partnership in proportion to your assets. But the idea here is, it is also problematic. Now, you cannot, if those contracts bear all this risk, you cannot take them and sell them in the secondary market to Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae. So in order for you to be able to do this, you will have to eliminate the risk as much as you can, as much as you need to be able to sell them in the secondary market. And that elimination of risk goes against the sort of the rules in the Sharia. So there are complications in all three kinds of contracts. Unless you have the political will and the economic capacity, not only the political will, because we are part, even in a Muslim country, in a Muslim majority country, we're part of the global financial system. And it is hard without so much political will and economic power, both of them, it is hard to have products that are truly compliant in essence, that are functionally Islamic, technically Islamic, and in every way Islamic. So that's the difficulty they encounter.
So Shaykhana, so again, to summarize then, what you're saying is that ideally speaking, the murabaha would be the best. All three of them in an ideal world, if we had the finances and if we had the wherewithal, you could construct an Islamically permissible contract, no problems. But we get to the crux of the matter, and that is, realistically, it is simply not viable for any corporation, for any entity to manage many hundreds, if not thousands, of properties and sell them to so many Muslim clientele without getting involved in certain conditions, certain clauses that are highly problematic. And this is where, of course, the problem comes. And that is that conceptually speaking, these three models yes, ideally it's possible to be 100% halal, but realistically, we know that when these corporations, when these Sharia compliant, they call themselves Sharia compliant companies, when they ask you to sign their 30, 40 pages of documents, there are so many specific clauses in there that are highly problematic and questionable. And as you pointed out, Dr. Hatem, they seem to be very unfairly prejudiced against the buyer and in favor of the company, whether it is distribution of maintenance costs, whether it is taxes, whether it is even late fees, which is another issue. And so let's now get to the crux of the matter here. We understand these contracts do have problematic clauses, even if ideally the model might theoretically be halal. Do you think these problematic clauses invalidate the permissibility of the contract? I know that's a broad-ended question, so feel free to elaborate and give the caveats over here.
Well, let me say this. The idea here is that the old contracts that we have that are established in the Sharia, you cannot really instrumentalize them in our modern times to provide Islamic modes of financing. You will have to have new contracts. Each and every scholar recognizes that these are new contracts, no matter how much we give them Islamic names or names of established Islamic contracts or transactions. These are new contracts. They're not the old ones. And many scholars, and that is, in most of the Muslim countries, they take the fatwa of Imam Taymiyyah, rahimahullah, where he, or the tarjih of Imam Taymiyyah, that new contracts can be halalized. That you could have new contracts. You don't have to use established contracts in Islamic fiqh, but you could make new contracts as long as those new contracts are not in conflict with the principles, with the Islamic objectives and the principles of Islamic transactions. So we do understand that these are new contracts. Now, these new contracts, in order for them to be halal, they need to meet certain guidelines. So in order for them to be halal and to provide a functionally a different alternative, an alternative that is more equitable, an alternative that will basically make Islamic finance shine and show, the transparency, the accountability, the equity, the social responsibility. Those are the characteristics of Islamic finance. However, Islamic finance in our times, even in Muslim majority countries, does not have that good reputation. Why? Because of different reasons. One, because of the difficulties of creating instruments like financial instruments within the global financial system that are compliant, because the global financial system is expectedly not really considerate of our values and our laws. The second one is that banks do want to eliminate the risk, whether because they want to eliminate the risk to be able to sell their contracts in the secondary market, or they just want to eliminate the risk because they want to eliminate the risk, even in Muslim majority countries. So there is a large distance between, what we aspire for and the reality, a large distance. Now, المرابحة للأمر بالشراء, بيع المرابحة للأمر بالشراء, or the cost plus sale for the purchase order, the problems with this, there are so many problems in this that cause this to be not completely compliant in its current forms. One is al-mu'ahada, is basically the mutual binding promise. It is not the promise by one entity, it is promise from both entities, which scholars consider it akin to a contract, although there are some differences, and I don't know how technical you want this to be, but if we want to make it not too technical, then we're saying, let's just mention, the major problems. One of the major problems is the mutual binding promise, which is al-mu'ahada, which is to many scholars akin to a contract. I promise to buy, I tell you, buy this for me, and then I give you a binding contract to buy it from you, or a binding promise to buy it from you. And that binding promise, some people said it's the Maliki position. Many Malikis would argue that it is not. Malikis do not even accept, the Murabaha concept to begin with. The Malikis, many contemporary Maliki scholars would consider the binding promise in these transactions to not be the proper Maliki position. And, the Malikis, like Shaykh al-Qaryani, for instance, wrote extensively on this issue. Shaykh Sadiq al-Qaryani, the Mufti of Libya. Now, this is just one of the problems, and we're talking about a binding promise from one side. We're not talking about a binding promise from both sides, which is even more problematic. But that is what happens. You have a binding promise from both sides. And then what is also unclear is whether the bank possesses the property, or the institution, the financing institution or the bank possesses the property before they turn around and hand it over or pass it on to you. That possession is important, is necessary for this transaction to be halal. Because al-kharaj bit-taman, as the Prophet ﷺ said, means that profit is tied to liability. If you do not become liable for the property, money does not beget money. There has to be some risk, there has to be some labor, there has to be some reason to make profit. Otherwise, money should not beget money. So the bank or the institution should own the property and then sell it to you. Does this happen? One institution wrote to the office of the controller of currency, and explained to them the murabaha type contract to convince them that there is no difference between it and between the murabaha contract and conventional mortgage, and to convince them, because banks should not be involved in risky ventures, risky investments. So the Office of the Controller of Currency would not allow them to basically be involved in a risky investment or transaction. So the bottom line is, the Office of the Controller of Currency told them that that this is functionally completely similar to a conventional mortgage, and it is okay, it is fine, because they have eliminated the risk to a point where you could not recognize any functional difference, functional, not technical, because the contract may be technically, but you cannot recognize any functional difference between it and the conventional mortgage. So that is one basically instrument of Islamic financing. Now, does it make it different to be technically different? Yes, it makes it different. Here's the point that we have to agree to disagree on. Some people say that we look so naive and we look so idiotic in front of all people that we are actually trying to, it is basically like setting up the net on Friday. And we're doing it, and we know that everybody knows that we're doing it to ourselves. How could we do this? The issue here is that you do not want to open the floodgates. You do not want to break that psychological partition between us and riba. We want to try as much as we can, even if there are some technical differences. We want to try as much as we can to have
Excellent
those
point.
differences, so we're not committing riba just like
Blatantly.
Clear-cut riba, So that's the point. So that's the first one. The second one that you mentioned is the diminishing partnership. And the diminishing partnership is the one that has been chosen by, like Muslims, Muslims who want to get into this business. They can't, as I said before, choose the murabaha, even though it may be easier, because, as I said, after you give the funds, you will run out of funds after like 4 or 5 customers, or like 20 customers, or 100 customers. You'll run out of funds. So you will need to basically turn around and sell this contract to Freddie Mac or Fannie Mae, and so that you could finance other customers. You couldn't do this if you're Muslim with the murabaha, because you can't sell a debt. So that the diminishing partnership becomes became the favorite for the Muslims that were like some of the Muslims that were pioneers in this industry. And I'm not saying that they did not put effort. They put effort. I'm not saying that there are no differences. There are differences. Are those differences functional differences? Sometimes maybe. One of the functional differences in murabaha, for instance, is that if the customer died, in the 1 minute between, transferring the funds to the seller and finalizing the contract between the financier and the final buyer, if the customer died, then the bank may be, So, but in the diminishing partnership, we do have differences, some functional differences, but mainly these are technical differences, not functional differences, but some functional differences. If, for instance, the bank, for instance, you insured the house, but the house for some reason, God forbid, got totaled, and the insurance company did not pay you the value of the house, the Muslim financier will not be after you for what they have given you, only for their share in in whatever payment that you will get, their fair share in the payment that you will get. If they now own 65% of the house, they will get 65% of the payment that you will get from the insurance company. Is that a functional difference? It is. Honestly, it is. So, but then there are many technical differences, and there are some technical problems also, because according to the IOFI standards, and that's the accounting and auditing, for Islamic financing institutions. So according to the IOFI standard, according to the different fiqh assembly standards, there are some rules that are so difficult to uphold by by those companies, or by at least in non-Muslim majority countries, at least when the laws, maybe in Malaysia you could do that, maybe in some countries that are more accommodating of Islamic financing, you could do that, but it is certainly very hard here in the US. And there are multiple ones, they will ask you to be responsible for the insurance. They'll ask you to be responsible for all maintenance, even the basic essential maintenance. They'll ask you to not sell the house for a certain number of years. And if you must sell prior to the end of the agreement, then you must buy them out first and then sell the house, and so on and so forth. Many things that are, and there's also some mutual binding promise involved. There are many issues. And then the future sale, whether it is by promise or contract, because when you do basically purchase the house, and each one of you has a share, you will either promise to buy a portion of the house every year until you completely buy them out, or you agree on the sale. It is either a promise or an agreement. If it is an agreement, it's a little bit more problematic, but if it is binding promise from both sides, it is also somewhat problematic. But it is very difficult without this. If it is very difficult to leave it up to the customer to purchase at the market price on the day of purchase. So we would agree, because then we cannot we cannot figure out how much the person will be paying. We will just, it will be 20%, 80%, and then every year I will purchase a portion of the house at the market price on the day of sale. That is to do it in a way that is completely compliant. But that, again, becomes very difficult. So are there clauses that are problematic? Are there makharij, outlets? Well, yes, because there are scholars that are working to find outlets. Does it take so much work? Does it take many opinions that are outside of the four madhahib? Does it take a lot of patchwork? It does. As we said, what are our options? What are our options? We either say, you don't need to buy houses, you don't need to buy cars, you don't need to buy equipment for business, you don't need to get into business ventures. Or we say, you must have completely compliant contracts, which are extremely, extremely difficult. And that is not to discourage people from pursuing what is better and from improving incrementally. And we do say this all the time to all the Muslim financiers. We do say this all the time to them, and we encourage them to provide better products. But also, we have to patronize them to become large enough to have the size so that they can dictate their terms. So that's the managing partnership. And finally, we have the last one that you mentioned, which is the ijara. And it is to a certain extent like the diminishing partnership, and it's not like it, but the same types of problems, that it is a commitment for 30 years where the financier is not going to wash his hands and walk away. The financier is the owner, is the lessor, and the customer is simply the lessee. He's not responsible, he's not liable, except in the cases of ta'addi or tafreet, negligence or wrongdoing on his part, Islamically, because we will have to apply the rules of ijara in Islam. That poses a lot of problems also, to become an instrument of financing, and then you get the financier involved at this level. It causes a slew of problems. So all of them have issues, but all of them show promise, at least, to be technically different from the conventional mortgages, so that Muslims are not committing clear-cut riba, although the contracts may not be, 100% Sharia compliant. Now, the fact that we got the clear-cut riba out of the way makes it easier on us to say that these basically contracts are halal to be party in. These contracts it is halal to use them for your needs, your various needs. Amjad's position so far is that these contracts, because of the clauses that are not compliant, Amjad did not sign sign on these contracts completely without reservations. But Amjad said, because of these clauses that are not completely compliant, these contracts are permissible for haja. If you have a need, these contracts are permissible. And according to Amjad, the declining ownership in its current application in America is the one that Amjad favored in its declaration.
Excellent. So, Shaykhana, this is very, very useful. So, again, to summarize, mashallah, went into a lot of technical detail. To summarize, and again, if I said something correct, then feel free to correct me. Obviously, the way that these three contracts actually exist in the corporations in North America, we're speaking primarily, we don't know about Europe, we're not talking about Europe, but the ones in America, North America, the ways that they exist realistically there are highly problematic clauses in all of these contracts, even though the asl or the basis of the theory is good, but because these corporations are ensuring or trying their best to ensure that there is minimal or no loss to them, so they put the onus of much of the burden and they put so many clauses that the functionality of the contract is actually somewhat similar, not exactly similar to mortgages. However, they are not all the same, and some of them are better than others. And of those that are probably of the best in the North American scene are the companies that offer the diminishing partnership, the musharaka al-mutanaqisa. Again, we're looking at the ones based in North America. And that's the fatwa of Amja. So again, Shaykhana, we've spent more than an hour speaking. I want to now be very, very clear here. And I'm going to give you the position of one of my teachers and mentors. And if you feel free to validate it or to reject it or to modify, tafaddal. But I know you're very cautious. I'm going to tell you what one of my esteemed mentors says, and it is something that I feel comfortable saying now, even though I delayed this for the longest time, and that is that there is no doubt that the Islamic Sharia compliant loans that are given are highly problematic. However, given the increasing need, given the situation of Muslims in this land, generally speaking, middle class, lower middle class, and of course anybody who's struggling, generally speaking, the haja is enough for them that they are allowed to avail themselves to these Islamic alternatives, even though they are not 100% permissible or 100% halal, let us say. But given the mitigating circumstances, we will say that we can overlook the problematic clauses, and especially those that are closer to the goals of the Sharia and have minimal clauses, and that is without mentioning the names of corporations. We don't want to do that, but the one that is al-musharaka al-mutanaqis, or the diminishing partnership. That having been said, this isn't just an open license. Rather, we encourage Muslim entrepreneurs and businessmen to think of models that are more permissible, that are more halal. We also encourage the lay Muslim to think long and hard that we haven't even discussed the issue. Is it even wise from an economic perspective to lock oneself into a mortgage for 30 years or to pay rent? There are many economists, Muslims and non-Muslims, that are actually saying paying rent actually is better for those, especially on the, in the beginning of their careers. They don't know where they're going to be going, etc., etc. So we don't want to just give a blanket endorsement. At the same time, insha'Allah ta'ala, for most average Muslims, it is permissible for them to purchase the house that they live in using one of these Islamic alternatives. And if they cannot find an Islamic alternative, these corporations are not accessible to them, or they're not able to get a loan from them, and their situation is not necessarily darura, but dire, let's say. I think Amja has that the phrase haja mas, I think, which is a new term that was there, but a strong haja, not necessarily darura. In that situation, perhaps even if they cannot find a Sharia compliant one, they might be allowed to even think of a conventional one. This is what one of my teachers has said. Would you allow me to say this, or would you want to put a caveat? Because I know you're very hesitant to say explicitly. So what is your position, Shaykhana?
Because of my reluctance and because of my hesitation to basically to have my own individual position, I just hide behind Amja's position. And I think that Amja's position is not really far away from what you said. I said, the only thing is that the person who is not able to find an alternative, I would say, ask the scholars that you trust the person who's not able to find an Islamic alternative and feels that his haja is such that a conventional one would be permitted for them. I would tell them, ask the scholars that you trust their judgment, that you trust their piety and trust their judgment. And it doesn't have to be one scholar. Ask, a couple of scholars, but both are trustworthy, and you trust their deen and you trust their knowledge. And it is okay to take the easier position if you feel.
Yeah. Okay, I can add that caveat, Shaykhana, no problem. We mandate on the person to get a specific fatwa for themselves. You're right about this. So I can add that. So that is definitely.
Then we are in complete agreement.
Okay, alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. So inshallah with that, Shaykhna, final concluding thoughts. We spent a lot of time. Alhamdulillah, we concluded on a very specific note here. Any concluding thoughts from you, any general nasiha and advice about this topic for our viewers?
Well, I advise myself and all the Muslims to think good of the Muslims, to think good of the efforts, that are being done by, well-meaning Muslims, and we're not angels, and no one is saying that we are angels. No one is saying that the Muslim financiers are angels. We make dua for them. We certainly advise them, and we advocate for the Muslim customers and advise them as much as we can, but we also make dua for them because we know that things are not easy. We know that they encounter many difficulties, and it is not always because they want to make more money. It is oftentimes because the circumstances, the laws, the financial environment around them does not allow them to do better. We still want them to do better, but we also want to patronize them so that they can basically develop, they can grow, they can reach the size where they can have the capacity to improve their contracts and to provide better products, better financial products to the Muslims. And I say to the Muslims that we are in this predicament because of our condition as an ummah. And reality is rational. Reality is rational. Let's not blame anyone but ourselves for our condition. Reality is rational, and you can't change it unless you are rational as well. So let's keep our heads down, keep working, keep improving, ourselves, our families, our communities, our ummah, and humanity at large. So just sincere, consistent effort from each and every one of us will, inshallah, improve and change our reality.
Alhamdulillah. Jazakumullah khair, Shaykhna. We had a very, very amazing, interesting conversation. I hope it was of benefit to our viewers. And Shaykhna, this inshallah is not going to be the last time we have a back and forth. This is the first time we had one, but I hope inshallah we can do multiple sessions. Definitely for our viewers here, the Shaykh's PhD was about medical issues and Islamic fiqh. So we definitely have to talk a lot about the changing understandings of medicine and how they're going to impact fiqh. He is a practicing doctor and practicing Shaykh as well. وَقَلِيلٌ مَا هُمْ alhamdulillah. So inshallah this is round one with our Shaykh. Inshallah we're going to try to have other rounds as well. Jazakumullah khair. We hope inshallah ta'ala that you benefited from this rather long and yet technical and yet also inshallah ta'ala very useful talk. We ask Allah Azza wa Jal to grant Dr. Hatem long life full of piety and good deeds and good health. We ask Allah for afiyah for him and his loved one and for us and our loved ones. We ask Allah Azza wa Jal to accept all that we do, to forgive our shortcomings, to exalt our ranks, and to ask and to cause us to die upon the kalima of La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. Until next time, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
يا من أجبت دعاء نوح فانتصر وحملته في فلكك المشحون يا من أحال النار حول خليله روحا وريحانا بقولك كون